right, everybody. While people trickle in, I'm going to start a nice introduction to our distinguished speaker for the Institute for Software Research, Dr. Daniela Damian. And known her for a long time because she's worked in closely related fields, especially looking at the human aspects of software engineering, but the collaborative aspects. And so she's been a leader in that for a number of years now. And I'm learning that she recently got an International Leader Award from the Royal Society of New Zealand to study software ecosystems. And you know, ecosystems mean a lot of things to different people, and it's a very important area. But again, today we're going to hear about how collaboration has changed, and that's a topic that a lot of us are very interested in the Informatics department. So,
thank you very much.
Thanks,
David.
Daniela.
Everybody can hear me in the back? Thank you for being here on a Friday afternoon. It's sunny, such a sunny, nice day. I had such a great day here, so thank you for those who came and met me and took away from their busy schedule. And the students, I hope I've been inspiring enough for you to continue in research. It's also much pleasure to come here and be in company of such distinguished audience. So I hope to deliver. I took upon myself quite an ambitious goal in preparing this talk. As David said, I'm working now for a few years, but recently in a New Zealand grant to come up with methods and study influence in software ecosystems. New Zealand firms, because they're so far away, they want to perform effectively in international ecosystems. And I was so excited to tell you about my study, but then I said, well, what's the bigger picture here? And to me, software ecosystem creates an opportunity, and they're driven by collaboration at scale and innovation at scale. And to me, that is what the software development is nowadays. So I asked myself, how did we get here? And I wanted to present an overview of collaboration, which I think is really the main mechanism to enable this innovation in software engineering. Being a requirements engineering researcher and practitioner at heart, I also think about innovation as product features. I work a lot with startups in Victoria, and I'm always interested in what makes a product successful in the market, and startups continue to be competitive. And that's what I refer to innovation in my talk, because I would like to bring a discussion about the relationship between collaboration patterns and ability and product innovation, as in product features for successful products to customers. So in my overview, I would like to take you through a journey of collaboration within what I call closed source environments, within a company going abroad to innovate through working with remote partners, to open source software where collaboration and innovation happens at large scale through voluntary and large bases of contributors, to where the place I want to get to is software ecosystems, as in marketplaces, platform ecosystems. And I think that is the place where software development has come to an unprecedented scale. And innovation is possible through these large collaboration patterns between now organizations, not just developers, but organizations. In my overview, I would like to, I picked and selected a number of empirical studies from my own work, but also from other researchers in the field, without trying to be comprehensive, but try to make points along in my story, and develop a story about a co-evolution of collaboration patterns and modes and how they changed alongside innovation, to a point where in the large ecosystem nowadays, I think collaboration happens and drives this co-innovation in software development. Because my overview is not, is a fairly high level, and I do not have time to be comprehensive, I do refer to collaboration in very broad terms, to refer communication, coordination, cooperation at times, and just to serve my point about patterns of interaction between developers and organizations in creation of usable software products. So there is no place to start, but pre-outsourcing with proprietary code being developed and products being developed inside one organization. Well, that changed with the promise in the 90s of video conferencing and distribution of interaction that would enable companies to go abroad. And that is often a partnership that companies have started to innovate through in collaboration with remote partners, whether they open their own offices or to leverage talent at remote sites, often cheaper talent, or to be closer to customers. So that was an area in the 90s of distributed development, and outsourcing was one form. The other one I will speak about is open source. But within the proprietary contractual processes, outsourcing was the way to go. Well, soon there were problems in paradise because research showed that although you reach out to talented coders in countries that develop cheaper, communication problems exist. And in fact, companies started paying more than less for their software development projects. And those problems were beautifully explained by Conway, as we know. If in large co-located teams, you would have largely monolithic architecture. When you go distributed teams, as in outsourcing or other forms of distributed development, you would have more modular architectures. And teams would work on different modules, teams that are co-located but distributed from the rest of the product team. And problems occur when communication had to happen across sites. And that is because problems of lack of awareness, lack of improper communication tools, all created delays. In our own investigation, I had the opportunity with my students to study IBM Jazz development team. One of the first, which tried to develop, Jazz was an add-on to Eclipse, a much more advanced tool for collaborative teams that are distributed. And they were developing the product from their own experience of distributed software. They were distributed at that time. In 2005, 2007, we started looking at their product and how they interacted. And we wanted to know if indeed they experienced delays that earlier research had reported. We looked at their project repositories, how long it takes to resolve issues. And we did not find the delays that were reported in literature. In a 6-week iteration project, they would report maybe half a day delay on issues that were worked on in a distributed manner. So we wondered why, other than they were very reflective and conscious of software being developed at a distance because they were developing Jazz, which was for distributed teams. So we wanted to map their collaboration patterns. And this is what we refer to as the flower pattern, where the nodes are developers. This is the entire Jazz team, worldwide distributed, about 120 developers. And the edges between nodes would be communication patterns when people reported or asked questions or replied around common issues. So communication patterns from their online repositories. And what you see here is the 7 distributed teams signaled by the black petals of the flower. And in the middle, you would have about half the teams being more strongly connected with the rest. And that was the core contributors that would also communicate very effectively with the team. So we concluded at that time that their communication was effectively mediated by the technical leaders in the project. These were project managers or leaders who would hold the strategic thinking around the project and communicate effectively to the teams. So having known about, which is similar to Conway's law, where distributed teams would communicate through interfaces effectively for knowledge to be disseminated at the remote sites. Well, that's good. That's good. But what about the extreme instances of coordination, if you wish? We wanted to know, these distributed teams would have certain communication structures, or overall the project would be characterized in some way in terms of communication. But really, how do they perform when they have to integrate code? Globally again, not just locally. So we were able to analyze a large data set of integrations, which we refer to builds. We needed to know whether the communication properties of the communication structure per build would actually be related to the success or failure of the build. So across 2-year historical data, we were able to investigate correlations between the measures of social network as the representation of collaboration of these people who had to integrate. we couldn't find any singular particular network or property to be significantly correlated to successful builds. However, we were able to build a predictor, a very simple Bayesian classifier. And by looking at the current social network in an integration and the historical data from the project across all the builds up to that point, we were able to predict about 70% of failed builds. So this was early on. The paper was published in 2009, but our analysis was like 2 years earlier. And it was one of the first empirical evidences that only by looking at communication of distributed teams, we found some evidence of impact onto the software performance and the team performance and the software quality. So communication really matters when it comes to distributing and configuring your teams in a distributed project. Also, we brought evidence to the fact that the way people collaborate and the quality of collaboration did affect the software success. So again, that was in a closed environment, if you wish, that outsourcing provided, where the contributions to the project were corporate-led. There would be an overseeing project management body who would decide the vision of the project. And the partnerships within these software development ventures would be mostly intra-organizational. A company would work with the remote site that they opened, or sometimes inter-organizational, where partnership would happen with the local team closer to the customers. Challenges still remained, and some of them are still unsolved nowadays. Culture plays such a big role in distributed teams. As well as lack of awareness at distributed sites, as we know, still impacts the way software is being evolved. And that comes to trust. So we learned in time that the human factors that are such underlying characteristics of collaboration affect the work of distributed teams. Ultimately, these companies would like to achieve an aligned autonomy of the different teams at different sites towards the vision of the larger company. So having talked about the outsourcing within closed boundaries of an organization, distributed ventures, the next natural step would be to look at open source projects, where the difference is the large contributor base where innovation now emerges from. So there's no prescribed governing body from the beginning in a project. Governance is emerging mostly through meritocracy and quality of work. The early studies of open source projects reveal some collaboration patterns. This is before GitHub, before open project repositories and issue repositories where people comment on work. Chris Bird has looked at email communication and social networks within email communication. And he found a beautiful social technical congruence according to Conway's law. Developers and contributors who work on related modules in the project also tend to have communication patterns that mirrors those dependencies. And that is to no surprise. What's to surprise is, however, that these people are distributed. They're not collocated anymore. So they seem to defy the challenges of distribution in that they found ways to communicate despite being distributed effectively around their technical dependencies. Another interesting result from his work was that those who are more active in terms of patch contributions are also the most active communicators. Again, in line with social technical congruence, that would say that those who contribute most to the project are those who actually collaborate with others a lot more. And that's no surprise. I know my students who do well in one course, they will do well in all the other courses. So it is technical ability as well as communication ability that came to play for open source projects. So to sum up, the insights when we go from closed to open development in terms of communication patterns, it seems that developers do find ways to communicate across distance. In open source in particular, it seemed that studies, Carl Goodwin's study, and I think 2007 or around there, he found no lack of awareness in open source projects. Developers had no trouble communicating via email, keeping updated and having awareness of project progress. Similarly, quality of work that was linked to communication ability seems to be related to the governance. And the meritocracy model in open source created the models of governance that made sure projects would complete and innovation was kept alive in these projects. So having talked about these early studies of open source, it is time to talk about a GitHub revolution, which really what it meant that there's visibility across projects. There is visibility of questions, ability to respond to questions, ability to follow one's work much more easily at large scale. And this is a view of GitHub that we were able to build by mining comments on issues on all possible projects in GitHub. We mined using the markup language. We came up with a very simple formula where a comment would relate to an issue in another project. And we refer to that as a dependent technical dependency between projects. Someone would indicate that a certain issue is either a duplicate, or it's blocked, or is resolved by another issue. And this is across different projects within GitHub. This map shows all the GitHub projects that were in a technical dependency. Now, as an example, we see here RubyGem, which is a Ruby package management framework, would have references from Rails, which uses Ruby. So the contributors in this project would relate to other projects, and that's why we call it as a dependent network. Now, going back to the big view of GitHub, one can observe that most projects are actually fairly connected to the other, and there is one big component, giant component that we could identify, which interestingly enough holds 57% of the projects. And this is a view into that core connected network, which shows that projects are mostly about, that support development, either libraries or languages or frameworks, and they're all connected with each other. That's a fascinating view of open collaboration at scale as enabled by GitHub. We can't help asking, if these are technical dependencies, what about social dependencies and behavior alongside these technical dependencies? Do they exist, and how do they look like? Now with GitHub, you could actually see and follow somebody else, and you could actually see Conway's law again in the form of project followers that are in the middle of these little communities. These are little ecosystems inside GitHub. They are followed by project owners of the dependent projects in their ecosystem. So we refer to this as implicit coordination that happens through the issues and the visibility allowed by GitHub. Now, open source is great. It changed the way we develop software and what's available out there for software development. Very interesting phenomenon happens when firms use open source for their own development of products that get monetized. And examples abound. Think about TensorFlow, Linux, Docker. They all form very rich ecosystems around them of companies which now contribute to open source to the open source project, so that their own products are being advanced. So because multiple companies can now contribute to the same open source project for use within their own product development, open source became a very important vehicle for coopetition. Which means that companies would now cooperate and collaborate around development of this platform that now allows them to compete in the market. Coopetition as a concept is not new to software development, and for those who study organizational behavior may know about it. In manufacturing, for example, Sony and Philips, early in the 90s, when they developed the first compact disc, they collaborated around the technical specifications for the CD, but then to sell the CD to a larger market than if they were individually developing the CD. So in coopetition, multiple companies, whereas they would have their own market share to work with, now they collaborate for the development of a product that allows them a much larger market share. And then they would gain a pie of a slice of a much larger pie. In software, you can think about Apache Hadoop. As I said, there's other examples, but with my one of the PhD students I work with, Johan Lineker from Sweden, he was interested in what companies and how do they compete around open source software. And Apache, as you know, it develops utilities for data storage, large data storage and processing, and as well as a lot of visualization and analytics that other companies can use in their own products. So he was able to mine a part of this ecosystem around Apache, and they would be comprised, for example, of platform providers such as Hortonworks and Cloudera. Platform users, Baidu with Twitter and eBay, use Apache for their data storage. Infrastructure providers, OneDisco, for example, develops a product and sells a product that integrates a number of Apache Hadoop utilities and clusters. Intel used to contribute to Apache Hadoop, but now had moved to using different platforms, and yet still pays for development on Apache. So these companies provide an ecosystem around the platform where they have an interest in the features and the capabilities of the platform for their own product development. My student, Johan, was interested in mapping collaboration patterns, not just competition patterns across these companies. And you see here with a node, a particular company, the size of the node represents the collaboration activity and strength in relation to the others in the ecosystem. So if a contributor from one project contributes to, or either a patch or a comment to an issue that another company has contributors contributing to, then we would have a collaboration instance between the two companies. So the more companies, the more issues that contributors interact with, that other companies interact with as well, that would make the connection between companies stronger, as well as the inbound and outbound connections from a node. That would make you a stronger element in the ecosystem. So when we look in time, he was able to map the evolution of this ecosystem per release. So you see here, release 2.2 has a few major actors. Hortonworks is the biggest in terms of collaborating and issues being resolved on the Hadoop project. And then in time, you have new companies coming in. Some are smaller and not as much collaborative with the others. And yet, some come and join Hortonworks. That changes with release 2.4 and so on. You see here Yahoo coming stronger in terms of collaboration potential activity to Hadoop. Hortonworks is also big again. And then here you have Twitter, Yahoo, and Cloudera taking also a bit of the share in the ecosystem. So the questions he had around this evolution and the collaboration patterns were related to influence. Would these companies, because they have an interest in development of the platform so that their own products leveraging that platform are successful in their own market, would they contribute in such a way to get those requirements and those features implemented on the platform? So again, taking a slice from this evolution, he wanted to see if there's any relationship between the number of links a node would have, which is given by the size of the node in the network, and the influence it has. Now, he said, how do we measure influence if we wanted to study the relationship between properties of the collaboration and the influence? Because the product features, the platform features are important for a certain company, and the product grows through the issues that are reported by the contributors in the ecosystem. He wanted to see whether the issues reported by a certain company and included in a release as a measure of influence is related to the collaboration activity. The other measure he used for influence was the issues interacted by a company's employees and contributors within the ecosystem that were included in the release. So again, these two measures refer to the interest that a company has in the platform, and by collaborating on the implementation of those issues and in collaboration with others, again, it is a collaboration activity and the patterns around that company that would create a higher influence in the ecosystem. Therefore, the platform serves their own product. And he did find a decent correlation, 0.6 and 0.7, between these collaboration patterns and the influence. Lastly, another ecosystem that illustrates an interesting dynamic around the platform and the ecosystem in relation to business strategies at the larger scale is WebKit, which is a project for it's a web browser for mobile devices. It was initially developed inside Apple. With some pressures, it was released as an open source in 2006. And you see here a network showing in red, you have one contributor from within Apple, but then you have developers from outside starting to contribute to WebKit. Later on, the next 2 years had seen a lot of more other external communication, and you see that Apple developers are only a very small part of it, as Apple releases its iPhone. So more people develop now apps onto the platform, and they have an interest in how the platform evolves. The next 3 years show a lot more contributors, a much richer communication network, and patterns. Interestingly, you can see how Intel and Nokia, their business partnerships changes. Nokia decided not to build on Intel anymore as a platform, and it now goes and establishes a partnership with Microsoft in 2011. And that is shown here, where in blue you see the contributors from Nokia further away from the Intel contributors. So on one hand, one would say that collaboration patterns still exist on the platform that both companies are interested in, and yet they're far further away, possibly because of the competition between Nokia and Intel. Lastly, the following 3 years show a further breakout between Nokia and Intel, which is in green on the left-hand side. But also you can see here how Samsung and Apple at that time in patent wars over the user interface were further apart. Apple would be in red at the top here, and Samsung at the bottom. So they're in different parts of the network. So visualizations like this have been created to show different patterns of cooperation between companies. Now these are cooperations between technical contributors when in face of certain business partnerships falling apart or being formed. To sum up, from in the era of coopetition, what drives these companies to innovate on the platform so that their products are more innovative is really the customer. So that had been a stronger trend in time, where innovation happened from outside on open source in fairly non-regulated environments, so that customers are happier. And really, through the collaboration patterns, these companies are able to obtain more competitive advantage and influence within their ecosystems. So to sum up the phenomenon from open source trend that was started 20 years ago, the platforms become source of a larger ecosystem around them, where contributions are really from a community, self-regulated community, and the software grows organically. In the firm-sponsored open source, products are being driven by the customer, and yet there's no single governing body that dictates the requirements, which actually happened in the initial outsourcing ventures. Outstanding challenges still exist. We know that peer reviews and code reviews are one of the most researched topic in open source, because when code that gets contributed to by large bases would suffer from quality challenges, as well as recently assessing position and influence within these ecosystems becomes paramount for these companies. Even more interesting, we go away from open source platforms to proprietary platforms. And as a segue, this is where I would like to get into the large software ecosystems I'm looking at nowadays. As a segue into that, I'd like to describe a hybrid ecosystem Collaborative Lifecycle Management tool suite by IBM. Includes a number of tools for requirements tracking, architecture, and design and testing. They're all developed on a common IBM platform that enables the different products to cater to different software development phases. And yet, what it does very specifically, it has an open issue tracker. Again, this is evolved with JAS in early 2000 into a very mature open issue tracker. Similarly, we know Atlassian, again, a very successful tool suite for software developers, and it has an open issue tracker. What's interesting to note here is how innovation now comes into their ecosystem. It is, you notice they have a suggest feature on their website. So anybody, at least with jazz.net, we have direct experience. You can create an account, see the project management and the issues that developers are working on, and you can provide input as a customer or as a developer, third-party developer on their platform within one of their customer companies. So going back to the IBM CLM ecosystem, what happens now, we have, if we place these products that IBM develops in their platform on an ecosystem manner, you can see an interesting dynamic. You have the consumers being able to provide input as to how these products work for them, so provide new features. As well as we have interface with other ecosystem out there, generating even more input. So this is now referred to as a open commercial ecosystem where the source code is closed, and yet the gateway to obtain new product ideas for product features and innovation within the IBM products is open to everybody. As an illustration, we were able to mine all these external contributions with ideas to one of the teams, for example, the products from IBM, and you would have contributions from external members of the IBM Java Foundation, emerging contributions from external organizations or other teams. So there's massive flow of information and innovation within this ecosystem. With one of my postdocs, Eric Naus, now professor at Chalmers University, we wondered again, how does this information now, once it reaches the ecosystem, how does IBM reason about it in terms of strategy, in terms of product features? It must be a chaotic environment. So we were able we did interviews and we looked at their project repositories and project plans. And there is a main source would be one of the teams from the ecosystem. They would have their own business models and business goals that are being taken into account as to what product features are being reasoned upon. But then you have the ecosystem trends. You have input from the consumers about how these tools are being used. And you have usage trends that developers may not have thought about. So now stuff comes into the product development from using the tools. Or you may have developer insights from some of these consumers within the ecosystem. This strategy now is being created, and they create a release plan at the level of the ecosystem, which then allows transferring this information down to a particular team release plan. So one ecosystem player now gets a release plan based on information from the entire ecosystem. So that was the insights we obtained from the open commercial ecosystem, where they opened up an innovation gate into their product. And yet, these companies would be competitors, those who use the tools or further customize their tools. The IBM wanted to have a strategic requirements engineering, if you wish. They wanted to still maintain hold on to the product features of the entire tool suite. But they wanted to allow each team to be flexible in how they implement those into their products. A biggest challenge would be from these customers who may be competitors to provide information onto the open repositories, especially if it was confidential. So IBM in the open commercial ecosystem wanted to be transparent and encourage openness, and yet that might have fired back at times into what information can be communicated. So going now across the borders of only one company with its ecosystem and the platform, I'd like to move on to what I refer to collaboration at high scale, where proprietary platforms are now enabling other organizations to build onto their platforms, not just within their own governance, such as IBM. And we know about Amazon services, which provide building blocks for others to embed into their technologies. We have the computing platforms, the iOS and the Android. We have the interaction platforms that enable others to use social media tools. And we have the marketplaces, which are third-party, two-sided markets that allow consumers and sellers to have business transactions. That is the model that I'd like to use to explain coopetition at large scale, which involves cross-organizational partnerships, not just developers or one company with other developers, but it's company to company. And the epitome of coopetition is really Amazon. So notwithstanding the current challenges that Amazon has in the coopetition world, when it started, it decided to allow other booksellers to advertise onto their own platform. They opened the door to their competitors to sell the same products as they did and make it and provide choice to customers. So this is the true coopetition, where they collaborated on the same resources of Amazon's platform to allow the user to choose. So they competed for the customer. Okay, the concept of network effects have come to be understood thanks to Amazon, where if you think about customers, they really are, a platform is successful if you have more customers. Why are customers growing on your platform? It's because they have a lot of selection. Henceforth, you have more competitors join you on your platform, and lower prices. How did Amazon do that? Well, because they allowed a lot of sellers to come onto their platform. That provided selection to customers who came and provided more traffic. And it was, Amazon was able to lower the cost, or all the sellers lowered the cost, and therefore provided more even better experience to the customers. So the network effects happen where the value of a product is increased, more users you have. Think about the telephone, where if you have two people now, the telephone becomes a communication medium. More people come and join the telephone and the network, the telephone becomes more valuable. So as a product, the telephone has a network effect where more people using it, the telephone becomes more useful. That's what Amazon has pioneered as a concept, where more sellers onto their own platform, where customers would come, and the platform becomes even more valuable for the sellers as well as the buyers. In the software development world, this is the project I just started, as David said, in New Zealand. I'm working with Xero, which had started as a startup about 8 years ago. And they decided to not just sell accounting software on a desktop, go to the cloud, make it a service, and create and open up, create an ecosystem based on their platform. So what does that mean, create an ecosystem? Similarly to Amazon, they invited other applications to build on their apps, on their platform, and extend their product with more features for accountants, bookkeepers. Okay? These extensions would mean customizations of their software for certain domains. I think of a hair salon. They would use accounting software in a specialized way, different than a bakery, perhaps. Okay? Extensions would also mean adding features at a vertical level where any user would use it. For example, a billing feature or shipping. Okay, that would actually apply more to Shopify, not to another example I'm going to use, not to accounting. But another example here is Vend, which provides a point of sale inventory and management application based on Xero. So they opened up, they went from product development to developing a platform and having open APIs, and anyone would come, developers, and integrate to their code. Similarly, Shopify, if you're not familiar, because you don't have your own shop, it's really a e-commerce website development infrastructure that has taken off lately tremendously. Over 2,500 applications into Shopify's marketplace, where individual, independent developers or organizations develop applications to extend the Shopify. So you would have, for example, a sizing application, you know, if you're selling shoes, that you would gladly provide on top of Shopify. And the customer gets the website development as well as the sizing application that they bundle if it's a shoe shop. They have many others that they feature on their marketplace. So what does this mean when it comes to coopetition? Again, going back to zero, you would have these apps that get a larger market share because of the zero customers as well as their own, and then zero would also get more market reach. So that is the collaboration that these companies entered. Now, what happens is if one of these features becomes so successful that zero wants to acquire it, that's when the coopetition situation occurs, because there could be other features, similar apps in their marketplace, and now zero is becoming a competitor to its own partners in the ecosystem. I believe there is a massive shift in how products are being developed, software products, because zero now is committed to providing a platform that is so extensible to allow these extensions and customizations with respect to providing more choice to the customer. So the product, they are spending less time developing features on their own product, but they are developing features for their product. They now nourish their network so that the product grows through these partnerships. It's not as much about selling their own product as an accounting software, but it's about developing business relationships with others so that the accounting software has a larger functionality through their complementors. The software companies, especially the service-oriented ones, they're moving from just watching what the users and serving the users and the customers out there on the market to actually watching not just the users do, but also their partners. The partners become their first-line stakeholders, the developers of these partners, making sure the platform is in a shape that these developers can extend upon or build to is as important to them as how the users use their products, because they get a market share. They came to really nourish the concept of flywheel. So if before a business would have a lot of customers, you know, you do requirement solicitation and you design a product where you serve a certain customer segment, right? But you lock in your customers and your input comes from a set of customers, and that's how your product gets built. You now look at leveraging your customers into a flywheel. So what they do, now on their platform, they encourage customers to use other products as well. And then through the word of mouth, these applications get adopted by other customers. So they bring other customers, that brings more sellers as in apps. So their customer base now grows and the functionality grows, not through nurturing just one set of customers, but enabling a ongoing flow of information to customers as well as the product features. So similarly, when organizations and more now go, Slack functions the same way, Salesforce. They go from product development to platform. It's not about being self-reliant anymore, knowing who your stakeholders and your users are, but being a team player within your network. Nourishing your network has become their main force. The most interesting and dear to my heart is realizing how now they entered an era of shared risk management and in features. So I asked them, we've done some of these interviews, what percentage do you roughly now develop in-house for your product, or you just watch the market and you watch these apps? Because what happens if one, as I said, if one of these applications becomes so successful, now they have to make the choice. Do we acquire that company? Do we build it our own, or we just partner and we keep them in our ecosystem? They don't have an easy answer right now as to what the best decision and criteria for those decisions are. But what they know about is that they will maintain a very thriving ecosystem. So in one example, one of their, for Xero, one of their successful applications was a receipt bank, which would simply allow scanning and managing your receipts for accounting purposes, right? Xero decided to acquire it, to build the same feature, and now the basic product that's being sold has a receipt scanning feature and management of receipts. They still maintain a receipt bank in their ecosystem, which again is true coopetition. And I said, why? They said, well, we first of all want to give customers choice, but also they watch the performance of their own feature as well as the ecosystem partner performance. And if the receipt bank has more stars or better performance, they use that as a feedback loop for their own feature, how to improve their own feature. And everybody benefits, particularly the customer. Similarly, they would acquire companies. A Canadian, Toronto's HubDoc was acquired for $70 million recently. Again, a document management framework. So, going to marketplaces, which I believe is the collaboration at scale, across different organizations. We have an open API platform ecosystem, similar to open source, very self-regulated. These companies do not want to impose any particular development on their app partners. They let them experiment and then make decisions on how their platform would grow to allow those extensions. And it's very much inter-organizational partnerships. Challenges exist very much. The quality of integrations really is what customers are faced with. And when they buy a product that integrates Xero with another application, it's Xero as well as the other company that is being judged for the quality. So integrations are very much scrutinized to maintain the quality of the product and the reputation of the company. They want to do strategic governance as seen at the platform level. The main decisions now are which APIs need to be extended and how to allow this ecosystem to thrive in directions that they want to pursue. So really it comes down to innovation that is at the platform level so that the external product innovation is enabled and very powerful. So in my journey, I wanted to provide an overview of collaboration patterns as well as how software development has changed from closed source business partnerships that leveraged either opening up another a project at remote sites or inshore development as in partnering, opening up your own office related to customers, to open source projects where the contributions were very much voluntary and large base, to the app marketplace, similar to Amazon's marketplace, where the innovation happens very much from outside, but it's fueled, enabled, and driven by business partnerships. What I would like to emphasize and claim that we live a time of open collaboration due to these open environments, but also where innovation happens at large scale. It's an unprecedented pace of innovation because of these collaboration patterns. So what I think we are living is a collaborative innovation era where innovation does not happen in isolation anymore within the inside of one product development company, but it happens through large-scale business collaborations. And the concept I'd like to leave you with is co-innovation at large scale that we are investigating and living by. For those who are looking for research questions from my talk, I'd like to present a very brief research agenda. I presented different types of ecosystems and collaboration patterns within them, alongside innovation. And we still don't have distinct models of innovation within these types of ecosystems. Closed, open commercial, semi-open, coopetition models, and new companies looking to open up from product to platform or creating new projects within such business partnerships do not have the support that researchers would be able to provide if we model this innovation within different types of ecosystem. Similarly, the ecosystem trade-offs I really touched upon very briefly upon, but there's still massive challenges and trade-offs to be taken into consideration, and implications for software engineering. Quality of integration is very much of the forefront of the project manager's agenda all the time, because of the network and ecosystem dynamic that can break the quality in products. So platforms are becoming so much more open nowadays, but what is the impact really onto the quality of products? And with that thought in mind, I'd like to thank all my collaborators whose work I highlighted in my talk today, and you for being here today and hoping to debate a bit more on my claims. Thank you.
Thanks for the great talk, and we'll take some questions up here, and then as usual, we move down to the 5th floor for the reception, and we can do more questions there too. But let's have some questions. Go ahead.
Does the competition with partners ever lead to lawsuits? We're so litigious, unfortunately, in this country, and I imagine with international law, it could get even more complicated. How did they manage that, or does it happen anyway? And what's going on with that?
Well, if you think about Apple and Samsung, right? I don't follow as much, these business breakouts because, we study software engineering, not as much business. But I think they have these lawsuits all the time. Like even now, I've read about Shopify and Apple. Apple is a partner of Shopify's ecosystem and vice versa when it comes to offering products to customers, and yet they have disagreements as to who owns what. So I think they happen in parallel very much. And that's the interesting part, how products continue to be co-evolved and co-developed by these different companies in face of their disagreements at different level, business level, yeah.
I think I had kind of a similar question, but for a company, how do they decide what to give away and what to pull back? And giving away certain things will make them more successful, but yeah, I mean, lots of places face that.
Yeah, so from the understanding I got from the study I just started, they often do have a vision if they want to go in a certain market. For example, with Shopify, if they see that point of sale is very much big revenue stream, right? They would have API development for apps that build towards point of sale, like applications that run on iPad, so that billing can be done on iPads in the store, right? So they target, I think, a certain market, and then they try to reason about which applications would be useful for the customers in that market, and then they develop the APIs to enable those integrations. Make sense?
Seems like a very different type of business sense and
Absolutely,
sensibility you have.
absolutely. And I think the challenge, but the exciting part is that product development now goes hand in hand with business development. And maybe any models that we develop cannot ignore those business partnerships and how they can make or break the product development that's serving the customer.
More questions?
This isn't so much a question as just a kind of an intriguing thought, is that I think you see similar kind of trends just in like our software engineering research community. I would imagine other research communities where you have different groups of people competing for each other for paper acceptance and for dominance in their respective little areas of research. But a lot of times they do share data.
They collaborate, yeah.
And they do kind of pass back and forth the baton of like, oh, well, they did this, and so we're going to extend that idea. And where you have critical mass, where people are all working on the same thing, working on the same infrastructure, you do have network effects where that whole area rises up in prominence.
I agree.
And again, no question.
I agree.
Just
I agree.
kind of an interesting thought that what you're seeing here in software.
And similarly, would you agree that collaboration and innovation co-evolve there? Like, who you collaborate with is really a source of innovation. And then more you innovate, you can collaborate with different people or a different scale, right? So if I were to build a new Conway's law, Damian's law, and co-innovation, right, I think that the innovation patterns may actually mirror the collaboration patterns. The collaboration enables that co-innovation and innovation and vice versa. It happens in different models because companies innovate differently these days.
Yeah.
Nana, thank you so much. Now asking the specialist in both topics, how does this change impact requirements engineering?
Oh, big time, big time. Because I teach requirements engineering and I talk about requirements elicitation and analysis methods. Whereas these companies, particularly startups, they read product reviews to identify features that customers are asking for. They don't go and interview customers anymore, right? So this openness with respect to quality of products and feedback on the products is now, we have the ability to transform that into product features much more seemingly and fast. We can be reactive, right? Similarly, you can read your competitors' product reviews and be ahead of them with respect to what customers want in their features. So and that's what I mean by innovation. Innovation is information that allows innovation in products is out there at unprecedented size and speed to these product development companies. And that's what I think fuels the business partnerships within ecosystems. What I like the trend is towards this higher consumerization. The customer wins. Now we do have a lot of in like Amazon. Some would say that this coopetition, aggressive coopetition by the big players in the ecosystem is unfair to the smaller organizations, right? So if the keystone actor in the ecosystem maintains such a big portion of the ecosystem, it becomes unfair. The others have no ability to grow. And then the keystone makes the rules. So I don't know where it's going to go. It will be interesting to watch the platform dynamic and the marketplace dynamic.
I guess I want to ask a little bit about the temporality of, in part because this is so focused on innovation. So I'm thinking about the organizations that I deal with are cultural heritage organizations and things like university libraries, and they are going to always have a hand out to stop, so they won't get onto a platform because their focus is not on the next quarter; it's on the next 20 to 50 to 80 years. And so they, to go to a platform is basically you are tying your infrastructure to life of that platform. So I guess the question for me is, so this is like, I specifically work with university presses, and they are just now starting to have little tiny talks about things like open source. And I think part of the reason there's such a lag is because they have to think about the long term. So the question is, how do we, this push for sped up innovation, what happens to when platforms become infrastructure, the stuff that we expect to always be running in the background? Or is that just not a concern?
I think it's a very good question. There's an article nowadays, someone tried to live without Amazon, Google, and Facebook. They survived for about a couple of days. That was it. Which speaks to the monopoly that these platforms as infrastructures, right? I don't have much hope for those because of the speed of innovation that happens out there. And if you lag, then who knows what's happening. Yeah.
Well, let's pause there and thank our speaker again.
Thank you.
And we have some announcements before you go down to the 5th floor to have some refreshments.
So this is the last ISR Distinguished Speaker of the year for us. But ISR is having an event on Friday, June 7th, the Southern California Software Engineering Symposium. It's a day-long event, and in the 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock time slot, we have a keynote. Emerson Murphy-Hill is going to speak on software developer diversity and inclusion. that talk from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock is gonna count as the informatics seminar. So if you're a student, that's the time that you probably wanna come. If you can't come to that time slot, you can come to the time slot before, which is from 1:45 to 2:45, and there will be 3 faculty presentations in that time slot. And it's a day-long event. There's a program out on the table if you're interested. Also, on May 14, which is a Tuesday, the Cybersecurity Policy and Research Institute and ISR are co-sponsoring an event on IoT security and privacy. So if you are interested in that, keep your eyes peeled. Publicity will start going out next week. Both of those events will be here in 6011. And social hour downstairs.
All right, 5th floor, social hour. Very nice. Ecosystems are so hard to get your head around, and they're changing.
Yeah, very complex.